Greetings, I'm Kristian from Cinema Nova and welcome to the Intermission Interviews. My guest today is nothing short of a legend within the Australian film industry, having guided Australians on what to see at the cinema for over half a century. Welcome to the Intermission Interviews, David Stratton. David, these uncertain times has become the catch cry of what we're currently living through. To your knowledge, what else has there been that's been as disruptive for cinema and filmmaking?
I've been thinking about this, and I think probably the worst was the transition from silent films to talkies. Just imagine every cinema in a very short period of time had to transfer from silent films to sound films using the very tricky technology of the time. Musicians who used to accompany the films, either orchestras in the big cities or pianists or organists, all lost their jobs overnight as this new, somewhat clunky sound system was put in originally. And the other big transition was surely the transition to wide screens, which happened in 1953, or began in 1953, when 20th Century Fox decided to go with CinemaScope for all their films, this letterbox size screen. And it's interesting to remember that Fox told cinema owners not only if they wanted to show their films, and they had a huge slate of exciting, potentially big box office films, they not only had to put in this big wide screen, but they also had to install stereophonic sound. And that was a big deal. I know in England, where I was at the time, the Rank organisation, which owned the Odeon and Gaumont cinemas, and which had always shown Fox films, wouldn't do it. And as a result, in my hometown, the local independent cinema was talked into putting in CinemaScope and stereophonic sound to show, first of all, The Robe and then How to Marry a Millionaire. Those were the first two. And that lasted for about 3 years before Fox then went back to Rank and said, okay, you can have our films, and the independent cinema went bust.
Yeah, of course. I hadn't actually thought about how disruptive either of those two things would have been. I mean, when we think about what we're currently living through, it's not dissimilar to, say, people draw comparisons with the Spanish flu, which is when I understand cinemas also closed. And I imagine World War II and World War I would have had an impact. But yeah, such an immense technological transition would inevitably cause a huge disruption across the industry for films, both in production and films that were even in pre-production as well.
Yeah, I mean, what made it interesting was that Fox, although they were very strict about their trademark of CinemaScope, they actually allowed other companies to use CinemaScope because they wanted to get cinemas across the board to convert to widescreen as soon as possible. So MGM started making CinemaScope films, Universal started making CinemaScope films. Paramount didn't. They went for a different system called VistaVision. But it was quite a crazy time. I mean, you mentioned the war, Kristian. I mean, the extraordinary thing to me is that during the war, things just kept going as normal. Movies, of course, in those days on 35mm, huge, heavy cans of film, were shipped across these dangerous waters with German submarines around. And I don't think cinemas were disrupted at all. We know that in England, Gone with the Wind ran right throughout the war in one cinema.
On that topic, I mean, following wartime or global events, visual storytelling tends to pivot according to the times with either changes to what's being made or approaches to actual filmmaking convention. What do you think the past tells us about the possible future changes that might come about after this crisis?
I think probably it's going to take a little time to see how that all develops. Most of the best films, let's say, about those sorts of global crises, like the war or, for example, 9/11, it took a little while for those films on that subject to be made because it was too raw to begin with. Although, having said that, one of the best post-war American films about the war was The Best Years of Our Lives, which was made right after the war. So it was possible to do. But of course, somehow a coronavirus plague is not quite such a sexy subject, is it? I don't quite know how we're going to deal with that in a cinematic, exciting way, but I'm sure some genius will work something out.
Well, it occurred to me the other day that it's extraordinary to think that for all the movies that have ever been made about apocalypse or something like that, what we haven't really seen from any filmmaker, to my knowledge, is anything that even approaches what we're currently living through, where we've all been asked to stay inside and keep to ourselves, and that the enemy is our neighbour or the person across the street, rather than being some plague or where your flesh melts off your bones, or zombies wandering the streets. So yeah, for all of Hollywood's ingenuity, nobody ever came up with this particular scenario.
No, you're right. I mean, but the zombie thing is almost the same thing, isn't it? I mean, I saw not so long ago, I can't remember the title, it was you may know it, a French zombie film. And
yeah, the Night Eats the World, I think, was about a man who wakes up in an apartment after a party and everybody's been turned into zombies overnight.
That's the one. Yes, exactly. So that's a similar idea, that you're stuck in your apartment and you don't go out.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating to think about how the parallels between what we live through versus what we see on screen can be so divergent, even though everybody's been thinking about similar things for such a long time. And while you've been stuck inside, I mean, have you been revisiting any classics, or have you been catching up on anything something that you perhaps missed at the cinema or hadn't seen up to this point?
Well, I've got quite a generous collection of films on DVD, so that's at a home cinema. So that is very good for surviving this kind of situation. Early on, my wife and I decided that we would pick 2 years, and we would explore the films of those years. I like the idea of looking in a fairly concentrated sort of way at the different sorts of films that were made at a particular time. So quite arbitrarily, I chose 1944. 1944 was a year that included, and we've been watching, films like, for example, To Have and Have Not. I've got a list here. Cover Girl with Gene Kelly. Another Gene Kelly film called Christmas Holiday, in which he plays a murderer who gets gunned down at the end. That's a bit of a rarity. An English film, Fanny by Gaslight. Arsenic and Old Lace, Gaslight. Laura. The Mask of Demetrius. Greenwich Village, which is a musical with Carmen Miranda. Double Indemnity, A Canterbury Tale, a Powell Pressburger film. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, about the bombing of Tokyo in 1942. Hail the Conquering Hero, a Preston Sturges comedy. 2000 Women, a very strange English film about women interned in a German hotel, actually in France, but by the Germans. And one of them is a traitor. The Uninvited, which is a ghost movie, and there's still lots more to come. We haven't got to The Princess and the Pirate yet, and various things like that. And then my wife picked 1993, and we actually started off with Philadelphia, which is a great film to watch during a pandemic, because it is it was a film that was a bit criticized in its day, but I think it's an astonishing film, bringing across to a very wide audience what AIDS was like at a grassroots level. Maybe it glamorized a little bit, I don't know, but I think it's a terrific film, and I was really pleased to see that again. We saw a Daniel Day-Lewis double, both made in 1993. Couldn't be more contrasted. The Age of Innocence and In the Name of the Father. How about that for a double?
Incredible. What an amazing award season.
Yeah. Clint Eastwood's A Perfect World, which is a quite neglected film with Kevin Costner, and very good, I think. The Pelican Brief, which was quite a lot of fun to revisit that. 6 Degrees of Separation, Fred Skepsi's film, which was Will Smith's film debut, which is very good. The Remains of the Day, Pedro Almodovar's Kicker, Sleepless in Seattle, and then we had to go out and sort of deviate a bit and watch An Affair to Remember after seeing Sleepless in Seattle, because you have to, don't you? When you
of course.
So that's pretty much as far as we've got. We've got a lot from each year to go through, and then if this lasts a long time, we'll pick a couple more years.
How many do you How many do you tend to get through in a day? Do you have a bit of a marathon, or do you kind of just meter it out one movie from each year?
Actually, I'm working on a book at the moment, which is a book I was commissioned to write on my favourite movies. So on weekdays, well, 4 days a week, I write about one film and I watch it again. So, for example, today I'm watching Delma Dave's 3:10 to Yuma, and I've nearly reached the end of it. So I watch it, make lots of notes, and then write about it for the book. And then after dinner, we delve into these 2 years, except for Monday nights. And I'm recording this on a Monday night. Monday night is our television night. We watch Four Corners, Media Watch, and Q&A. So we take a break from movies. We're creatures of habit, both of us.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And then on Fridays, I write my piece for The Australian, which is a sort of nostalgic piece. I've been writing about films of the past. What I've written for next Saturday is all about The Birds.
A masterpiece.
Yeah.
I love The Birds. I think I saw it when I was very young, and it had quite an impact on me at the time.
I'm sure it would. Yes, I had great fun writing about The Birds. And then for Mother's Day weekend, I'm writing about films, mothers in movies. So they are everything from The Grapes of Wrath to Psycho.
Yeah, well, I was going to say Psycho would have to come up in any kind of Mother's Day retrospective, surely. And I mean, obviously, there's going to be huge ramifications for our industry as a result of the shutdown. And it's interesting to kind of think about what they might be, whether it be impact on the Academy Awards or the Cannes Film Festival, which for a while there looked like they were going to try and persevere, but at this time seems unlikely. Not to mention all the other film festivals that are due to occur in the next couple of months. How do you kind of expect that those things will sort of flow on and impact, for instance, the Academy Awards early next year?
Look, it's very hard to predict because nobody knows what's going to happen. I mean, I am full of hope that things will get back to normal as quickly as possible. But people say that until there's a vaccine, that might be difficult, and that's a long way ahead probably. So I really don't know. I guess there's a possibility for cinemas to reopen, but with of course distancing used. But for some cinemas, I read an interview with Benjamin Zeckerler of Palace suggesting that would be financially unviable. So it's really hard to tell what's going to happen. As far as the festivals are concerned, I've been in touch a little bit with the director of the Venice Film Festival because he's a friend, and up until recently he was still viewing films online with the potential to programming the festival, but I think he probably, I can't see it happening, to be honest. Venice is in August, September, and I can't really see that happening. Toronto, I don't know whether that will happen or not. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, and the Oscar season, well, again, it depends if the big films can open in time, if the cinemas can be opened by the end of the year. I noticed one state in America, I think it was Georgia, was saying, well, we'll reopen our cinemas, but with what? What product are they going to open with, unless they have wonderful retrospectives like 1993 and 1944?
Well, maybe that's an option. Yeah, we could go back and revisit 1 year a week until we eventually get some fresh content. Well, I mean, I know that there is certainly the major studios are angling for a mid-year return to business. A lot has been said about the new film from the filmmaker behind the Batman trilogy, as well as Inception, Christopher Nolan, which is called Tenet. That's currently due for release in July and has been consistently on that date and has not yet moved. But I do know that a number of other titles are scheduled to release mid-year as well. So, but obviously what happens in Australia may be different to what happens overseas as well. We may see effectively a staggering of releases across the globe. So it'll be very interesting to sort of see how this all plays out. Well, thanks very much for talking to us today, David. It's been a real pleasure, and we wish you all the best as you continue to make your way through the best films of 1944 and 1993. And we look forward to speaking to you and return to the screens on the other side of the intermission.
Me too. I'm looking forward to that very much. I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to that. All the very best, Kristian.